listening to the Metal Command Podcast.
Welcome back to the Metal Command Podcast. Tony here with you, and today I'm here to talk about the new Exhorder album, Defectum Omnium. Out now on Nuclear Blast Records. A different album than their last album, which came out back in 2019, Mourn The Southern Skies, and it's also a little bit different from the first two albums. Now, before I get into what I think about it, let me talk about some of the reactions across the heavy metal world, not just with all of you, because I did pose the question whether you all liked this album or not. And of course, I decided to glance at a few reviews to see where the metal media world has this album, because it's much different. To me, it's different from the last album that they did. And part of the reason it's different is the departure of Vinnie LaBella, their lead guitar player, who, in my opinion, was an integral part of the band's sound. The reactions are mixed. I've seen some reviewers out there completely tear this record apart, and I've seen reviewers absolutely love it. And that seems to be the general consensus with most of you out there in the heavy metal world. My opinion is this: I like the record. I think it's good. The biggest question mark I had coming into this wasn't Kyle and his vocals. Kyle's vocals are always top notch. Mourn The Southern Skies, I got to be honest with you, I thought was a phenomenal record. And what's funny is that I always kept wondering when Exhorder is going to come into the modern age and make a record. Because a lot of these thrash metal bands that weren't around, 20 some years ago, they came back, like Exodus and Death Angel and some of these other bands that hadn't been around for a while, came back and started putting out amazing records. And Exhorder was one of those bands where I always wondered, will they ever come back? And when they came back with Mourn The Southern Skies, it was a 10 out of 10 for me when it came out. One of the best records of 2019. Then when I heard Vinnie left, that's where the huge question mark came in. Because going into this, I knew Kyle and his vocals, and I'm speaking of Kyle Thomas, I knew his vocals would be very good. That was not a concern for me. The concern is who is going to play the lead guitar parts and what's the album going to sound like. With me, personally, I listen to music to see whether I like it or not. I don't base it on whether a member has left the band or joined a band. The reason I don't do that is because I've seen bands bring in new people and make phenomenal records. I've seen bands who don't bring in new people and the albums suck, right? I mean, it happens. You don't know what you're going to get. Now, if this album, in my opinion, sucked, this new Exhorder album, Defectum Omnium, then I could point and say, okay, losing Vinnie was probably a big reason for this. But the thing is, I like the record. I think the album is great. They brought in Pat O'Brien from Cannibal Corpse to play the lead guitar parts. That's who they brought in. I heard that coming into it. I was kind of like, okay, we'll see what this sounds like. Again, we don't know. Some people out there will write a band off and become closed-minded and won't even listen to it or really give it a chance because a certain member has left. That is not me. So when I ended up getting the full album, I think it was a couple weeks ago, I'll be honest with you folks, I liked it right away. And the biggest highlight for me is the lead guitar playing by Pat O'Brien. Now, why is that the biggest highlight of the album for me? I mean, number one, I like the songs. I think the songs are well written. I expected Kyle Thomas to sound great on this record. But the reason the lead guitar parts are such a highlight for me is the fact, number one, that was the biggest question mark. And number two, I absolutely love the lead guitar parts. In fact, they are better than what I thought they were probably going to be. They sound better. They're well played. I mean, just those lead guitar parts were like the key to it for me. Are those leads going to be good? are they going to be subpar? Now, I expected them to be at least decent. Pat O'Brien's a good guitar player, but they're much better than what I expected them to be. And they complement the songs really, really well. So even though I gave Mourn The Southern Skies a 10 out of 10, it was an Album of the Year candidate. I'm giving this album an 8 out of 10. I think it's a little bit of a step down. 8 out of 10 is still excellent. And honestly, to be fair, Mourn The Southern Skies is my favorite album that Exhorder has ever put out. However, don't take that as a slight on this band, giving it an 8 out of 10. It's still a great record. However, they lost a guy that was a huge part of their sound. And I think what ends up happening, especially when bands go through a phase like this, where they lose somebody like that, where they part ways with them, what tends to happen is when they bring new people in, there is a learning curve. You have to learn each other as musicians. You may have great musical chemistry, but there's it's different. You're not making albums with the same person that was a big part of the band's sound. So it's not uncommon for a band to take a little bit of a step back. Now, Exhorder's step back, in my opinion, it's much better than, some albums that bands put out that, have been together with the same group for a long time. But it's a little bit of a step back because, again, I said the same thing with Judas Priest when they put Firepower out, right? Like, I thought that, the album was great, but, with all the lineup, with the producer change and stuff like that, changing producers and all that. But I thought they would make the next album a lot better. And I like Invincible Shield a lot better than Firepower. Same thing with Exhorder. I think what happens is you have new blood in there. You have a very, very good album. But I think their next album after this is probably going to be a lot better. Simply because, when you're working with new people and you're in a new situation with with people that are different, there's a lot of things you look back on, okay, I can improve on this, or I can improve on that. And that next record is going to be much better. And I think that's what's going to happen with Exhorder. I think this album is good. Folks, don't write this album because write off this album because Vinny's not in the band. The album is very good. I don't like it as much as the last one, but I still absolutely like it. I mean, I wouldn't have listened to it for 2 weeks if I thought it sucked. Especially when I get a lot of albums sent to me every single week. So it's a little more groove-oriented. Vinnie LaBella, yes, had his own style. I think Pat O'Brien nailed it. I think he did a great job. And his lead playing was on point for this record. Now, with that being said, let me give you my favorite songs on the album. So if you're going to go check it out, you know what songs I at least love off the album. So my favorite song on the album is actually the 9th song on the album, 3 Stages of Truth / Lacing the Well. Phenomenal song. Phenomenal track. Absolutely love it. Desensitized, Sedition, the 2 songs after it are my favorites. In fact, are among my favorites. In fact, what's funny about this record is once you start getting into it, like the album gets better as you get into it. Like the first couple tracks, that are on the Wrath of Prophecies, Under the Gaslight, Forever and Beyond Despair, those tracks are good. But as you get into this album, it gets better. And right about the middle, when you get to Divide and Conquer and Year of the Goat and Take It by Flames, that to me, the middle of the album is the best part of it. It gets better as you get into it, and that's what I like about. That's another thing I like about it, is it gets better as you listen to it. So I would check it out. Don't write it off. I know a lot of you have mixed reactions to this record. I still think it's an 8 out of 10. It is definitely a phenomenal record. As far as the fact they lost a guy, they lose a guy that was a big part of the band's sound, and still managed to put out a very good effort. And that's pretty much all I have to say about it. With that being said, folks, thanks for watching. Stay metal.